Hello and welcome to SciLux, the podcast where we talk about scientific developments and technological changes in Luxembourg, and as usual, proudly powered by Research Luxembourg. And in today's show, our guest is Dr. Denisa Sologon, who is the Senior Research Scientist at the Living Conditions Department of the Luxembourg Institute of Socio-Economic Research. Denisa's main interests are in the development and application of policy microsimulation models and the quantitative analysis of large data sources, administrative survey, to aid the design, evaluation, and improvement of public policy. Denisa, thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, that last sentence I couldn't really read correctly because there are a lot of long words and very complicated, and I hope we'll be all explaining that. And we already touched upon one thing that you talk a lot about, which are the microsimulations, and you love them, I have a feeling. So first of all, we could say that you are interested in both development and application of policy microsimulations. So what are they? I mean, simulations I get, but micro, it's not that they are very small and you can't see them. What is it actually?
So policy microsimulation models are sophisticated computational tools used by researchers and policymakers to simulate policy, economic, and social changes on a population of micro-units, meaning households and individuals. In its simplest form, a microsimulation model links a tax-benefit calculator, which calculates taxes and benefits for a particular country in a particular year, with a data source, be it survey or administrative, which usually contains detailed information on individual characteristics such as income, employment status, demographic, and household composition. So whatever we would need to compute some of these taxes and benefits. These models are designed to analyze complex interaction within a population between the household characteristics and the policy environment. By applying mathematical algorithms and statistical techniques to these data sources, microsimulation models can estimate how proposed policy changes can affect different segments of the population, different types of households. The model can operate within various frameworks. We can have static microsimulation models, which deal with the day-after effect. So if a policy change is being implemented, we can calculate the level of the population, how households are being affected. If we want to look at behavioral changes, that means it's a second-order effect. We have to take into account that households and individuals may adjust their behavior, like consumption, labor supply, to these policy changes. Some models are dynamic, meaning that we can look at changes over time in certain indicators. Others can be spatial. In spatial microsimulation, we usually tend to combine several data sources to create a synthetic population, usually at different geographical scales. It can be municipalities, regions, and we can analyze policy impact at these smaller scales. So by employing microsimulation models, researchers and policymakers can get a more comprehensive understanding of the functioning of tax benefit rules and how these impact different sides of the population, thereby aiding in the design, evaluation, and improvement of public policy.
Okay, this sounds lovely in theory, but I want practice. So first of all, to do all these lovely microsimulations, you need a lot of data. So where do you get the data from?
For example, one microsimulation model used by policymakers across the European Union is Euromod. So Euromod is a pan-European microsimulation model that simulates or calculates the taxes paid by households and the benefits they receive comparatively across the European Union. By comparing tax benefit rules across various European countries, Euromod offers insights into how policies affect households differently across different borders. The comparative modeling of tax benefit rules not only provides valuable insights, but also allows countries to learn from each other, facilitating the exchange of best practices and the development of more effective and equitable policies. So in essence, Euromod provides policymakers with a comprehensive understanding of how tax benefit models, policies impact households' financial situation across different countries, aiding in the development of better policies.
So this eventually means with Euromod that you have the same data points for each country. So it's easier to compare the countries.
Yes, so Euromod relies heavily on the EUCIL data, which in the long name it stands for European Union Statistics on Income and Living Conditions. This is essentially a big survey which is conducted across all European countries in a comparative manner to understand how people live and what is their financial situation. So it's a question which is being asked in all European countries. They ask people about their income, employment, housing, education, health, and other aspects of their life. So by gathering this information from a large number of households, EU-SILC helps policymakers and researchers to understand things like poverty rates, income inequality, again, comparatively across different countries in Europe. It's like taking a snapshot of how people live and what is their financial situation and their social conditions, with the hope of providing enough information to improve welfare for everybody. So the Euromod tax benefit microsimulation models relies on Euromod to understand the effects of potential policy reform before they are implemented. In case negative effects or unwanted effects are noticed for certain population groups, then these reforms can be amended for having the intended effect on households.
And once again, I'm saying the same thing, that's theory. But then you go to the policymakers.
You go to the policymakers.
And what happens?
Of course, it's obvious I like Euromod. We use it a lot in Europe. It is used by the European Commission and by all policymakers across the European Union to really understand how tax benefit rules affect households. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Euromod was the first tool used to really understand the impact of the COVID-19 crisis and the COVID-induced policy responses, the benefits that were put in place during the crisis in order to help households mitigate the risk and cushion their household income.
But the response was different in different European countries. Does it mean because the countries had different characteristics, or people were just relying less on the data? What was the story here?
When the crisis hit, we were faced with a big challenge. There was no data available. So, as I said, most microsimulation models rely on survey data, but usually there is a lag of 1 to 2 years between data collection and data analysis. So the latest data we had, it was from 2018. But at the same time, policymakers, they need recent information to be able to understand what's happening in the population and to formulate appropriate policy responses. So in this situation, when governments need real-time knowledge with respect to the income situation of the households, we were able to provide this with our microsimulation infrastructure. So we were able to flexibly modify to apply nowcasting techniques, which in essence use real-time statistics from administrative data on sectoral employment, wages, and prices to calibrate the latest survey data and the parameters of the tax benefit system to reflect the situation during the crisis. So we were aiming to provide a near real-time picture of the population and identifying those which were most affected. So, of course, this was a simulation, so it was based on older data, but updating this data so as to reflect the current situation during the crisis. So having kind of a snapshot of a population during the crisis, we were able to evaluate whether the existing policies were effective in mitigating the impact of the COVID-19 crisis or not. For example, in Luxembourg, what we found with our research, that the system was already very well equipped to deal with the crisis. But in other countries, such as Ireland, UK, they had to put in place new policy instruments to be able to deal with the crisis, as the existing system was not able to cushion household incomes sufficiently. So in Luxembourg, inequality was constant across the crisis, which I think is remarkable. It shows that the system was able to cushion household incomes and protect them against the shock, whereas other countries had to do much more policy work to really introduce new policy instruments to help households. One example is Ireland. We've been working with the Irish team there. We evaluated several policy reforms introduced in Ireland in the course of the crisis. And for our contribution, we received the 2020 Miriam Herderman O'Brien Prize awarded by the Foundation for Fiscal Studies for our contribution done to understand the impact of the COVID-19 crisis and the policy responses. In Luxembourg, we have contributed with our work for the COVID-19 task force. So we try to give our best input in a crisis situation. It was a very difficult year, the COVID year, because we were all working remotely. There was very little data available. People were in different parts of the world. But, via Zoom development and Teams development, we were able to put things together and deliver our simulation models in times of crisis.
And this is something that you mentioned that was very interesting for me, the nowcasting. So, I, as a layperson, know about forecasting, but nowcasting is something totally new to me. So the whole idea is actually using real-time data.
Yes, so we use the latest survey. That means it's data about the population of household individuals, but we use current statistics, so aggregate statistics, to calibrate the data to make it look as it reflects the current situation in employment, in unemployment. So you try to mimic the current situation of the population. And on that, you apply the policy changes and you see how it affects the incomes of the households.
So does it mean also in this situation using machine learning, somehow calibrating the data through certain models, algorithms, or is it a different method?
We don't use machine learning. What we do is more like a reweighting technique. So we reweight our data. We make the population resemble the characteristics at the aggregate level as it should look during the crisis.
And where did you get the data from? Because you said that was a challenge, right?
So Static was very reactive during the crisis. So we were able to get statistics from Static. As well, the Eurostat website provided from statistics based on the labor force survey. It was quarterly information. In Ireland, it was the same. CSO provided information almost in real time, so researchers were able to calibrate their simulation based on how the crisis had evolved. I think the relevance of microsimulation for policy making became much more clear during the COVID-19 crisis because we were faced with a lack of current data to evaluate the impact of the crisis. And these kind of tools were indispensable to really understand the impact that this shock had on household incomes and what policies had to be put in place in various countries in order to protect households.
So this basically means looking at a very individual level, let's say, of the population, right? You said micro units.
Yes, a level of the household.
A level of the household. But then you have to somehow aggregate the data again to take the decision. Let's say, okay, that percentage of households is going to be hit. This means that we should actually pay attention to that type of policy.
I mentioned before that microsimulation is a very useful tool for looking at distributional impact. That means we look at households in various income groups, the households with different characteristics, like single parents, people in the bottom quintile, very poor households. So this distributional view allows us to really understand how different households with different characteristics were affected differently by the crisis. And of course, then you can target policies more effective to those which are more affected.
I think now I got it.
Okay.
And I think this is also the moment that we can leave a little bit the microsimulation world, but still look at something that, of course, you're researching. We didn't say the word, but of course, it's LISER. So there's a lot of discussion of inequality, right? So if there's inequality, we have a great pub quiz question to ask our listeners. So I know you prepared something about that. And
let's see. I have a pub quiz question.
Yes, exactly. So as usual, listeners, remember the answer only at the end of the podcast. And now just the question.
In 2019, before the global crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Bank reported on income inequality using the Gini coefficient, which is a measure where 0 represents perfect equality and 100 represents perfect inequality. According to their data, which country had the lowest Gini coefficient, indicating the most equal distribution of income among its citizens? So I'm giving 4 options. A, Denmark, B, United Kingdom, C, Germany, D, France. And a second question, which country had the highest Gini coefficient, indicating the most unequal distribution of income among its citizens? The same options, A, Denmark, B, United Kingdom, C, Germany, and D, France.
And I think with the second question, it becomes very tricky because you would assume that you will get a completely different list of countries, but you have still
I kept the same countries to make it easier.
To make it easier, I don't know, but remember, answer only at the end. And now we're coming back to microsimulations, of course. So I think I am kind of catching up with you and your explanations, right? We have the challenging part of the policy makers here. You said, well, with Euromod, it was actually cool because many of them were taking it into consideration, right? But still, my assumption would be that the main challenge is data for those simulations.
It's true. Yeah.
Am I right or not really?
You're absolutely right. So our models are as good as our data. The better the data, the better our simulation. So we need to have detailed information, the household level. The more information, the better it is for us to really evaluate these policy reforms. Depending on the complexity of the tax benefit rules, we need to have in the data those variables which allow us to create the eligibility conditions to simulate those benefits for those households. So you're absolutely right. So our models are as good as our data.
And isn't that a challenge in Luxembourg in general when it comes to data collection, is that there aren't enough studies for you to actually really have big cohort to study later on?
Well, for microsimulation analysis and looking at inequality and poverty, I think having EU Silk is plentiful. So it's a very rich data. As I said, it's comparative. It allows countries to learn from each other, best practices, compare results across Europe. in a consistent manner because it all relies on the same questionnaire, the same collection methodology. So in this respect, I wouldn't say there is a problem. Another project that I'm working on is called the GUIDE project. So this aims to be Europe's first comparative, national representative longitudinal birth cohort survey, which is a research infrastructure which hopes to be an important source of high-quality evidence to support the development of social policies which will enhance the well-being of children, young people, and families across Europe for many years to come. So GUIDE will be an accelerated cohort survey designed to capture data on 2 cohorts of children. One child cohort age 8, which will start to be collected in 2027, and an infant cohort of children age 9 months, which will start to be collected in 2029. Both cohorts will be surveyed using a common questionnaire and data collection methodologies at regular intervals until the children reach the age of 24. So what will result, it will be a high-quality comparative data on child well-being, relying on harmonized instruments with a longitudinal coverage, which is the best you could get. The consortium is impressive, so it comprises of 24 partners from 22 countries. Luxembourg became the national partner in 2021 when GUIDE was appointed the European Strategic Forum on Research Infrastructure Roadmap, which marks GUIDE among the highest quality and most valuable research infrastructure in Europe. So GUIDE will offer policymaking unique insights into key transitions into children's lives and policy interventions and their outcomes. It will allow the ability to make international comparisons on child and youth well-being using a common methodology. Again, it's very important. This will offer policymakers the opportunity to go beyond their local context and understand and gain more important insights from different countries and the potential explanation for different outcomes in different countries. All this will serve them to shape better policies, is knowledge to shape better policies. As I said, this is a very rich data which aims to be collected in the coming years. At present, there is no data source available to scientists and policymakers to analyze comparatively the well-being of children and young people across Europe as they grow up. So GUIDE will be an important source of information. Some countries already invest in national cohort surveys, Germany, Denmark, France. In Luxembourg, we have the Children and Wellbeing Survey and the Youth Survey, which have already provided the government with a large range of information on children and youth well-being. But these are still national studies, so they are not comparative. They are not easily comparable across countries as they contain different questions collected at different times with different age groups. So it's difficult to make comparisons across countries. So the highlights that emerged from national surveys that in order to support decision-making, you need to follow children as they grow up. You need to compare the results across European countries using cross-national panels and learn from best practices, and therefore having the benchmark for designing better policies.
And how does it actually work for a European cohort study? I mean, what is the sample? Because, we're a small country, so how many children are actually participating from Luxembourg? Is it the percentage of the population, or how does it work?
The samples targeted by the consortium depends on the size of the country. We have had many discussions, and for Luxembourg, the aim would be to actually target the entire population of children, let's say age 8 in 2027, 9 months old 2029. Previous experience of our colleagues who worked on cohort studies in LISER, there is usually a 30% response rate, which would give us a sufficient large sample for children. People are willing to answer more questions about children's surveys. So there is a high interest in Luxembourg about child well-being already. So parents are eager to participate in these surveys.
But then can you also use data from other countries in order to see some causations and correlations, or not really? Or because, I'm still trying to understand the added value of a European cohort study. Is it more comparability across countries to understand how the policies shape the well-being? Or is it also the ability to actually extrapolate data for certain similar groups of children and have actually more data for that matter?
So on the one hand, you have the cross-country comparison, which already offers a valuable insights because you compare the same age groups interviewed at the same time. So you kind of really can compare cross countries, the effects, and you see which countries fare better. And on the other hand, the longitudinal dimension offers the opportunity to evaluate policies over time, so you can actually draw causality from the policy interventions.
When we talked about countries, I was just kind of thinking, going back to the Euromod and the discussion that for Luxembourg, it's very important to also talk about the cross-border workers and cross-border people, which is not so much Luxembourg itself, right? But all the people who come here on a daily basis. And just what do we know in that context?
So I think you're talking about spatial inequality now.
Yes,
spatial
exactly.
income
So first of all, what is that?
What is spatial income inequality? So spatial income inequality refers to difference in income levels among different geographical areas, being cities, regions, or countries. So imagine a map of your country and you notice that in large cities, average income is larger than in smaller regions, like smaller towns. Then the variation in income levels across different regions, we call this spatial income inequality. So place is important for a household living standard. So the pattern of economic activity determines where people work, whereas the population centers, local facilities, housing prices determine where people live. So there is a great variation across space as families make choices concerning where they work and where they live. When considering a household standard of living as the income remaining once non-discretionary expenditures have been subtracted, means housing, commuting, and childcare, there are significant variations across space and within areas. This is a very important issue in relation to public policy in terms of targeting policies and mitigating place-based inequality or space-based inequalities. Luxembourg and the greater regions have specific problems as they are highly dependent on the cross-border workforce, which is part of this dynamic labor market. The factors that shape inequalities in living standards are extremely complex in a cross-border setting because it involves different local labor markets, different local housing markets, the cost of commuting, and public policy. For cross-border workers, this is highly complex because they have to function in two policy environments. They live in one country and they commute to work in another. Whereas there is a good understanding about the drivers of income inequality at national levels, much less is known about these drivers at local scale, and even less in a cross-border setting. So at LISER, we're working on a project which aims to understand this spatial income inequality in the cross-border region. So it's Luxembourg and its cross-border regions. We plan to extend Euromod. So Euromod, again, the tax benefit simulator at European level. For the moment, it only models taxes and benefits for the 4 countries. So Germany, France, Luxembourg, and Belgium. There is no rules model within Euromod to capture cross-border commuters. So a person that is in UCL data in Belgium, we don't know if that person is a commuter. So his or her income will be registered as being resident income. So according to Euromod, it will be taxed according to the resident rules. Whereas in reality, it's different. The person who works in Luxembourg pays taxes here. So we will be able to understand how tax benefit rules interact with the housing cost, with commuting costs, in shaping people's decision to move or to migrate to Luxembourg. So it's a very complex setup. We plan to disentangle the role of labor markets, like wages, tax benefit rules, housing, and commuting costs in actually shaping this spatial income inequality or the distribution of welfare in the cross-border regions.
So you said you don't know that the person is actually paying taxes in Luxembourg. It means that that question was not posed. The assumption was if someone is living in Germany, they're paying taxes in Germany.
Yes. So SIL collects information on residents, but they don't ask them, where do you work? So we do not know whether the person works in Belgium or in Luxembourg. So the source of income can be from Luxembourg, which means that there is a redistribution of labor income from Luxembourg into Belgium. But we cannot capture this with the questions and the setup. So we have to extend Euromod. And of course, again, then we're going to combine SIL dataset with census data, probably also the cross-border HFCS, to really create a synthetic population around Luxembourg, where we can actually simulate the impact of being a cross-border, being a local person, to see exactly how the incentives to commute or to migrate vary when we vary these conditions. We try to understand the incentives behind this decision in a cross-border setting.
And do you think that will be interesting for the policymakers in Luxembourg or more for the cross-border countries?
I think it's very interesting also for the Luxembourgish policymakers. We don't know yet exactly what are the implications. We want to attract a higher labor force to Luxembourg, but I think we need to really understand the tax benefit implication at the distribution level, so really at the level of the household. People commute here, they spend hours in traffic. There's a cost of time, there's a cost of commuting, the monetary cost. So all this has to be factored in, because that it influences the decision of people to move or to migrate.
It just reminds me of the discussion I had with a guest quite some time ago, also from LISER, about the well-being of commuters and the stress related to that, right? And then it also comes into inequalities, we said, but also housing and the housing discussions we have here and policy. So there's a lot in the library of SciLux podcast that was already discussed, because, well, these are very important questions and issues for Luxembourg for sure. So good you're doing that. That's a good step.
We try to understand the net benefit of commuting. So once you factor in their housing costs, they pay less for their housing in the cross-border region, but they pay much more for commuting. There is time, there is money. It's very complex.
Yes, definitely. And then, of course, you have also the childcare, right?
Yes.
And just the family well-being as such. I always wonder how much time, because I've never seen a study that would tell me how much time actually the families living, let's say in France or in Belgium, spend together, because they are basically commuting and the children are somewhere else. And it's really, it's so difficult to quantify that, right? From a personal perspective, for sure. Okay, so we're jumping a lot because you're just doing so many different projects, and it's in a way simulations, but not always. Of course, data, you can analyze a lot of different things concerning inequality and not only. And I noticed that there was one more project we haven't discussed yet. So just looking at the digital skills. And in this case, of course, the analytical programming digital skills of researchers and students. So what's the situation? Are we supposed to be happy or not really? The current situation of researchers?
The answer is mixed. Currently, the digital skills, particularly in analytical and programming aspects linked to microsimulation among researchers and students, vary depending where they are in their academic journey. In predoctoral studies, meaning postgraduate and master level, there is very little emphasis on developing analytical and programming skills relevant to microsimulation. Most programs, they offer one or two modules focused on quantitative analysis, which may not adequately prepare students for the complexities of microsimulation modeling. Microsimulation modeling requires practical skills, so hands-on experience and experiential learning. While theoretical knowledge is important, so I think the module that I've been taught now is mostly focused on setting the theoretical foundations and less on practical applications. The practice is very important in microsimulation. So many microsimulation skills are acquired through on-the-job training or via PhD program. So the complexity of this work requires individuals to learn through practical experience, finding and fixing errors, and collaborating with more experienced colleagues. So how we work with our PhD students, usually they start from a model that works. So they don't start from scratch. It's very difficult to achieve any advancement in microsimulation if you don't give your students a good start in their research. They're able to work with the model that functions. They go through the model. They understand how to run it, how to find errors, how to fix them. And then once they become a bit more experienced, they are offered the opportunity to actually extend the model with their own contribution. So they are learning from our experience, having our support, but also they learn a lot on their own by figuring out themselves how to solve problems. Microsimulation work often involves navigating through very complex code, identifying and fixing errors, and experience plays a significant role in really understanding where these errors are and how is the best way to fix. So much of the microsimulation work is intangible. It involves things like debugging, refining algorithms, interpreting results. So these tasks require patience, attention to details, and persevere. And of course, a love for coding, which us coders, we understand.
Yes, and data literacy as well.
And data literacy, yeah.
But that's, of course, the very base. But, we could again go back to the situation of schools and, yes, all the time talking about how much more coding and data analysis there should be. At that level. But yes, let's not be very negative, but just mentioning somewhere there, right?
I think our children are very smart and they are learning really fast. They are catching up with the current technological developments, and they will be way ahead when they reach adulthood.
For sure. And this is also a question of, easier entry, let's say, in the sense that, I remember when I was writing my first program at school a long time ago, and you really needed to study the language and understand everything, and even debugging required a lot of knowledge, right? And nowadays it's definitely the idea of no code and low code and situations where you can already have something running without really knowing the language that well is amazing, isn't it?
I started working like this from an existing model, and I've learned on it, and then I developed my own skills. It's difficult to start from scratch. It's really difficult because they don't know when they start. They have the master level and master level skills, which, as I said, it's still the emphasis on really gaining these analytical skills is quite low. So it's the PhD that pushes your limits and develops these skills to the maximum. And these are skills that are very hard to come by. They require lots of perseverance, like patience, and it's very hard work. But I believe it pays off. So most of our students that invest in these skills, they find a good job afterwards. So I believe it's a skill worth investing in.
As you work at LISER, I have to ask a bit of a controversial question. Do you think there is some problem with social sciences and these type of skills? Or it's just that they've never really met the right teachers or didn't show the right interest at the right time?
I can talk about my field. So in terms of microsimulation, analytical skills, as I said, we come from different PhD programs, different master programs that have very different levels of analytical skills development. So we welcome the PhD students and we try to level them up to the level of our research team. It's very important not to work alone, to have a very good international team that can promote you from where you can learn. Your promoter and your supervisor are crucial in this work. You need to have a good relationship. You have to trust each other. We give them our work. It's our lifetime work, and they have to be respectful of it. They have to work with integrity, and they have to push the boundaries further and dedicate the amount of attention that we have dedicated to that piece of code that they receive.
And this is a very good point in general. It fits very well with the discussion I've had about mentorship in academia, and also actually just the previous episode where I was talking about epigenetics.
Okay.
So a bit further from your field, but exactly my guest said something that I really liked. First, it was very much, big words, because he said that the mentor should let you fly and spread your wings or whatever. But then he said and he or she should also show you that you're going the wrong direction.
That's very important, because we learn time management. We learn project management during our PhD. And if you don't have the right mentorship, you can really lose time. A PhD usually lasts between 3 and 5 years. If you don't have the right mentorship, the right supervision, you can really lose those 5 years. And it's a huge investment, because these are the best years of your life. So if you're not using them right, it's a waste. And it's a pity to use the best 5 years of your life that you could have invested somewhere else into a PhD that doesn't give you the return that you expect. Investing in a PhD is not a secure thing, because the academia, it's very tough. The job market after PhD, it's really, really tough. Permanent contracts don't come easily. There is a fierce competition. So you have to understand there's a fight ahead of you. So you really have to choose wisely whom you work with, the skills you're investing in, and who you are surrounding yourself with. It's very important.
And I think this is a brilliant lead up to the last subject I wanted to kind of touch upon. The episode goes live more or less 1 month after the 11th of February, which was the Day of Women and Girls in Science. And you had the amazing opportunity to be in the Women and Girls in Science campaign by Research Luxembourg and partners. And I wanted to ask you about the experience. How was it? Did you enjoy it? And what were your feelings about it?
I think it's an amazing initiative. I think it's something that girls and women need. They have to be shown that they can succeed in scientific careers. Of course, the experience varies and the support varies from your family, because of course having children and pursuing an academic career, scientific career is not easy. It's not easy. You have to have a partner that really is able to really share the work. So in our household, I'm very lucky with my partner. We are really sharing the responsibilities. So I was able to invest in my skills and push my career forward. But it's important to show girls that it is possible, but it requires a lot of hard work and a lot of perseverance. And filming was really interesting. The team was amazing. It's a very uncomfortable situation, because it's something we are not used to, being followed by cameras and really acting a certain way. It was a very interesting experience. I also had my children on the video. They were very happy to be filmed. So I enjoyed it. And I believe in this cause. I really think that we should work harder to make the voices of women in science louder and louder.
Yes, so you're a very perfect ambassador of the campaign for sure. And I was just thinking that you've had a difficult couple of months now, because not only the campaign where you had to be filmed, but now you're also in a podcast. So yet another not typical situation for a researcher.
Yes, it's out of my comfort zone. I have to say it is.
But you'll see, once you start it, you can't stop, because that's the problem. It's the opportunity that you get, right? The chances. And I have to say openly that I've had a lot of women in my show, and some of them were amazing guests, but they actually didn't think this way before because they just never had a chance and they never went out of their comfort zone. And then the moment they did, and they got that kind of a kick, and I was saying like, that was so good. It was an amazing exchange. And I have to say that from my very small data set, it did happen more often with women. Of course, I had men like that as well. But there is something about women in science in this particular environment that happens sometimes. So it's good to have that campaigns and good to talk about it and good to give the opportunity for sure.
Well, I have a rule. If something scares me a lot, I do it. The scarier it is, the more I want to do it. I think it's important to push ourselves to really get out there and really make our voices heard. I have 2 boys at home, and I'm really, I work hard for them to promote gender equality and to show that women have the same rights as men, that we should have the same opportunities, and I hope they will do the same with their families when time comes.
Last question about the campaign. Of course, we've been pretty positive, except for those moments when we're discussing challenges of policymaking, of course. But what about you personally? What were the challenges you faced in your career as a person, as a woman?
I have to say I was very fortunate in having an amazing mentor during my PhD and after. So I was very lucky with the team that I grew up as a scientist, which I think the way you are being brought up as a PhD student matters a lot, how you behave later on. So I had a person on my side that promoted me, that really pushed me out of my comfort zone, my barriers, knew my strength, really made me become better and better, which I think is very, very important. Others probably didn't have this luck. If you don't have the right mentor, you can really get lost. It can be a failed academic career if you don't have the right mentorship on your side. I was very lucky in this respect, so I'm very grateful. Then I found a home at LISER, which was amazing for me. So I always tell my children and my father, my mom is no longer with us, I tell them I do what I love. And I think it's so valuable to be able to do what you love. I wouldn't change it for the world. I'm doing what I love.
Perfect. So this is the moment to finish the conversation, because I think that's, just the right kind of a motto at the very end. But we have to also solve the pub quiz.
Yes. So let's see the answer.
Flew away into the campaign, but now we're coming back, dear listeners, to tell you what
Do you want to venture an answer?
No. I can always cut it out later on if I get it wrong, but no, I don't want to venture an answer. So once again, if you can actually repeat the question,
I will repeat the question.
I'm pretty sure people might not remember what it was about.
So in 2019, before the global crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Bank reported on income inequality using the Gini coefficient. It is a measure where 0 represents perfect equality and 100 represents perfect inequality. According to their data, which country had the lowest Gini coefficient, indicating the most equal distribution of income among its citizens? So we had 4 options: A, Denmark, B, United Kingdom, C, Germany, and D, France. So the answer to this question is A. Denmark is the most equal country.
Okay, that was my assumption. Now I can say that it was the assumption.
And which country has the highest Gini coefficient, indicating the most unequal distribution of income among its citizens? So again, the same option: Denmark, United Kingdom, Germany, and France.
France?
UK.
Once again, we need to remember this is an equal distribution of income, because we could also
so we
talk about other inequalities, right?
Yes,
Okay, good. So we've learned something today, at least I did, and I shouldn't have said the answer, because now everybody knows that I have no clue. No, I'm joking. Thank you very much, Denisa, for coming today and explaining all this fascinating research. And I think now I know what microsimulations are, so I'm very happy about that too.
Thank you. You are an amazing host. Thank you very much for making me feel comfortable speaking.
Thank you. And this is it for today. Don't forget to subscribe, to follow us, to check what we are writing on all the social media, suggest guests, write, comment, and say hello if you feel like it, of course. This was Silax, and my name is Hanna Siemaszko.